Hello, welcome to Jackson County Building Zion, read by me, Tyson Peterson, written back in October 21st, 2011. Today I'll be reading you the first three chapters, Meryl Snow, Homecoming, and Called to Serve. This book is dedicated to Sherry for guiding me on my path, Addie, Landon, Jameson, and Jackson, Charlotte, Maggie, and Faith, for being my pieces of heaven on earth, and to Trevor for helping me to gain that heavenly perspective. Chapter 1. Yes, God will assuredly raise up a man like unto Moses, and redeem his people with an outstretched arm, as their fathers were redeemed at the first, going before them with his own presence, and will also surround them by his angels. I expect, when that time comes, that man will understand all the particulars in regard to the temple to be built in Jackson County. Journal of Discourses, volumes 21 through 22, Brigham Young. I remember my father reading that passage to me when I was a young boy growing up in Laramie, Wyoming. It had been a typical family home evening. Dad had the lesson, Mom made cookies, and all of us kids were acting like worms on a hook, wanting to get out of there. This time, however, something changed inside of me. I was only 5 or 6 years old at the time, but I remember my father's tone changing. It almost seemed like he was reading a news story rather than some passages of scripture about a people from a very long time ago. What he was saying was fact and would indeed happen. The only question was when. I remember sitting there on the large gray wraparound couch, suddenly wiggle-free, listening to my father describe Jackson County, the way it would look with all of its splendor and glory. He explained that this is where Christ would reign in the Americas, and that the time for all of this was in the not-too-distant future. Little did I know then just how much of a role my family would have in the building of Jackson County into the New Jerusalem. This is not my story, though. It's my big brother Brett's. This is a love story, a faith-building story, and a life-changing story. And it all started with a man named Meryl R. Snow. If you were to look at who owns the land of Jackson County, Missouri on October 1st, 2024, you would see many areas that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints owns. But also some they still need to acquire. Some of these pieces was the land owned by the Church of Christ. Efforts made up to that point to purchase the land had failed miserably. That is, until a church called Meryl R. Snow. Meryl was an ordinary man. He stood about 5'7" and weighed about 250 pounds. He had a jolly countenance, perhaps because he was always smiling. A lot of people said Meryl reminded them of Santa Claus. Because of this, he was asked quite often to dress up as Santa during Christmas. He was also a bishop in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for a ward in St. Joseph, which is about 60 miles north of Independence, Missouri. Meryl had just finished with a Temple Recommend interview when the phone on his large brown desk rang. The president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Benjamin C. Thatcher, was on the other line. Meryl's stomach dropped to the floor as he tried to sound as calm as one could while talking with the prophet. "Hello, Brother Snow. How are things going in your neck of the woods?" It was such a disarming greeting, so friendly and natural-like. Meryl felt as though he and President Thatcher were old school buddies. It seemed strange, but at the very least it put Meryl at ease. They're going great, President. To what do I owe the pleasure of your call?" "Well, to get to the point, Meryl, I wonder if you might be able to come up and meet with me next week." Because of the tone in President Thatcher's voice, Meryl did not hesitate. He knew that when he was called, he needed to answer. "Of course, President. Is there anything I need to bring, or—" Meryl wasn't sure what was going on. He wished he had more information. Certainly being called to meet with the prophet was no little thing. "No, Meryl, you don't need to bring anything. Your wife might like to come, though." "Yes, indeed, President. We'll see you next week." So it was worked out that Meryl Snow would go to see President Thatcher on September 25th, 2025. It was a light, blustery day in Salt Lake City when Meryl and his wife Lorena arrived. The Salt Lake City airport was busy with people moving all around them. There were so many things going through Meryl's mind that he didn't really notice the man near the curb just outside the baggage claim doors, holding a sign with the name of Snow on it. "We're the Snows," Lorena told the man. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Troy. I'll be driving you to church headquarters." So the Snows followed Troy with their luggage out to his car. all the while silently laughing at this turn of events. Suddenly, yesterday, Merrill was a bishop in the St. Joseph First Ward of Missouri. When he wasn't busy fulfilling his calling, Merrill worked as a real estate investor. He had been in the business for some years, and after receiving his calling as a bishop, he got quite good at it. He still had connections with a lot of good agents as well as mortgage brokers. It brought him great joy, especially when he could help young struggling couples find a home at a great deal. He also worked with local businesses when they would need to move their businesses. Not only would he get them a great deal, but he also knew the best areas where their company would do well. Once Merrill was led into the tall church headquarters building in downtown Salt Lake, everything else around him disappeared. He almost forgot his wife was with him until she grabbed his hand for reassurance. Lorena, with her kind blue eyes, looked up at Merrill. She didn't understand why President Thatcher would want to see Merrill, but she was proud of him for being considered for something. Lorena had joked a lot when they were younger that Merrill couldn't become a general authority because she couldn't handle him being away so much on church business. This seemed like one of those times, and to her it wasn't funny. Still, she would always be supportive of whatever came. Before they knew it, President Thatcher's secretary led them into his office. It was a grand office, but not overly extravagant. As you enter the room, the first thing you see is the prophet sitting behind a large, dark cherry wood desk that has pictures of his family all arranged on it. Behind him is a large window looking down on the streets of Salt Lake. Around the room, you'd find pictures of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Prophets, and a few temples lining the walls. In the corner, a bookcase filled with the books of the gospel. It was a comforting office, and just the way Merrill expected it to look. As soon as Merrill and Lorena stepped inside, President Thatcher got up from his desk and walked around to greet the Snows with a warm, two-handed handshake, the kind he was famous for. "How was your trip?" President Thatcher asked as he motioned for the Snows to sit. "It was great," Merrill said nervously. The prophet could see his nervousness and tried to calm him with some humor. "You know, I had the opportunity to speak in your state quite a few years ago, Merrill." "Oh, I didn't know that." "Well, you were probably only about 4 or 5 at the time." Merrill was intrigued and wondered where this was going. "Do you know my parents very well? I don't think they ever mentioned it to me." "I know of them. You see, I was speaking in a state conference, and your father was one of the speakers as well. As I recall, he had just been called to serve as the new second counselor in the state." Suddenly, Merrill remembered the story. "Oh, that's right. I remember him telling me this story now. I remember your father had gotten up to speak, and he was talking about how much he loved his family and his children. It was in the middle of all of this that you spoke up in a voice the whole church could hear. "Oh, no, President, please," Merrill said, starting to feel embarrassed. "You said, 'Dad, I need to go to the bathroom.'" President Thatcher was laughing so much he could barely get the punchline out. "And who would have thought that so many years later I'd be made a bishop in that same state?" Merrill tried to joke. President Thatcher went on for a moment making small talk, asking Merrill how work was going and how the ward was. For a while it almost seemed like a personal priesthood interview. But Merrill knew the big news would have to be coming soon. "Merrill, how much do you know about the church's efforts to build a temple in Independence?" The Snows tried to maintain their composure. Most Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints people in Missouri followed that news as closely as they could. Merrill most especially followed it because he worked in real estate. He knew about trying to acquire land, how much it costs, and who owns the land. It was a very interesting subject to him. "I know a little. I try to follow the news on it as best I can." "So you probably know that so far we've been able to get about a third of the land in Jackson County." "Yes, that's what I've heard." "Well, Merrill, it's because of this situation that I've called you into my office today. The Lord has revealed to me that you are the one who will help the church get the rest of the land we need in Jackson County so that we can begin to build the New Jerusalem." Merrill paused for a moment, trying to grasp what was just said to him. For Latter-day Saints, the New Jerusalem means quite a lot. It means the approaching of the second coming of Christ, appearing once again, the millennium, and so much more. But how did Merrill fit into all of this? "Wait, I'm not sure I follow here. How soon do we need all this land?" Merrill was shocked that those words would come out of his mouth. Of all the questions he had at the moment, the one he asked was, "How soon?" "The sooner you can get it for us, Merrill, the better. I know of your experience in real estate, and I know of your knowledge of the land in Jackson County, and what is needed to get the land for us." It was quite the meeting. President Thatcher went on to show the Snows the land the church had already acquired, and what was left to be purchased. Some of the harder land deals would be the ones with the Church of Christ that the prophet had mentioned. Merrill knew this as well, and he asked how he could handle it. In response to this concern, President Thatcher asked Merrill to think of himself as a modern-day Moses. He was asked to lead the people into the Promised Land and to make Ramses let the people go. "The Lord will provide a way," the prophet said. It was true that Merrill was interested in the subject, and he was very relieved to hear that he wasn't going to be made a general authority. However, he'd be working very closely with church headquarters over the next little while until the land was all acquired. After the meeting, the Snows had some time before their flight out of Salt Lake. So Merrill took Lorena out to eat at the Roof restaurant overlooking the great capital of Utah. "So how do you feel about all this?" Lorena asked her husband. Merrill wasn't sure how he felt about all of it yet. It wasn't like being called to the primary or Sunday school where you kind of know what to expect. Merrill was treading in new waters here. "I don't know yet. I know how important this is to the church. If the Lord has faith that I can do this, then that's all I really need to know, I guess." That was how Merrill was. His faith in God was something of a miracle to his family. When they had first gotten married, Merrill and Lorena struggled a lot with money and raising children and other stresses, but through it all, Merrill kept his faith, and it grew even more as the years went by. As a bishop, his faith in the members of his ward was both a blessing and a trial for some. Bishop Snow would quite often meet in his office with a newly called member and would hear something to the effect of, "Are you sure this calling's right for me?" He would usually laugh his friendly laugh and then say, "That's just what I said when they called me to be bishop." The Snows' visit to Utah had changed their lives from that moment on. Merrill was still the bishop when he got home, but now he had another calling on top of it. He started going to more town meetings and began building relationships with the major landowners and independents in surrounding areas. The one relationship he took the most care with was with the Church of Christ. From day one, Merrill made their relationship about so much more than a land deal. He went to many of their meetings. Merrill would talk with them for hours about their beliefs and what he believed as a Latter-day Saint. They never bashed on another's religion. There was always the highest respect for what they believed in. So much so that when Merrill had learned that the Church of Christ was looking to get a bigger presence in St. Joseph, Merrill contacted church headquarters to see what kind of land deal he could get them. The hope was that in trade for a good deal, the Church of Christ lot would sell their land in Independence. The land deal was one of the last major ones that needed to be completed. Merrill had worked hard for 3.5 years getting the land the church needed. Now it was down to the Church of Christ lot in Independence. Merrill, along with the help of church headquarters, worked very hard with the Church of Christ, but they would not budge. No matter what they tried, they weren't going to sell their lot in Independence. Merrill spent many nights worrying and praying about what he should do. He thought over and over again about what President Thatcher had said, about thinking of himself as Moses. Much like that situation, Ramses would not budge, and so the Lord sent plagues. Merrill had tried almost everything, so once more he prayed, with more faith and more diligence than he had ever done before. He had prayed that the Church of Christ would see the power of the Lord and be moved from their place in Independence. Then one morning it had finally happened. One of the most bizarre forces of nature ever seen. A tornado touched down just 30 feet in front of the Church of Christ lot, ripped right through their building, wiping it clean. Once it made its way through the lot, the tornado dissipated. The Church of Christ was forced to rebuild, and given the oddity of the situation, they decided to move to St. Joseph and let the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints purchase the lot. So, with the Lord's help, Merrill had done it. The church had acquired all the land they needed to start building the great Independence temples that would be one of the greatest temple projects ever to be accomplished here on earth. It would be these very temples that would stand forever until they would be taken up into heaven, like the city of Enoch. It would be from these temples that Christ would rule and reign, and his glory would surround the temple as a cloud during the day and as a fire at night. These were to be the grand temples to usher in the second coming of Christ. Chapter 2. What should I do with my life now? For the past 2 years, I've dedicated my life to serving the Lord in the land of Iraq. There are so many skills that I've sharpened and gained, and so many people that I've grown to love. What should I do when I get home? More importantly, what would the Lord have me do now? Thoughts like these were floating around my brother Brett's mind as he sat next to Dad on his flight back home. There he sat in his black suit coat and sparkling white shirt, trying to get his bearings. It had been 2 years since he had been on a plane, 2 years since he had seen our father, and it had been 2 years since he'd seen Savannah Michelson. And in just a few hours, Brett would be home with Savannah. Would be home, and Savannah would be there waiting to welcome him home. A lot of changes happened while he was on his mission. It was his very mission that was one of the last areas of the world needing to be opened, along with where I was going to serve. Of course, there had been non-proselytizing missions there for several years, and the membership there was in good number with many faithful members. Around that same time in the news, there had been a rumor spreading that the church would announce the building of the temple in Jackson County. Very shortly, but in Jackson County, Missouri, very shortly. But Brett decided he would wait and see for himself. For the moment, he was enjoying the view out the window of clear blue water, which for Brett was a sight for sore eyes. So did I tell you that your mother and Savannah have been working on a little home party for you? Yes, Dad, it's all you've been talking about for weeks now. I'm starting to think you're more excited for the party than I am. Well, maybe I am. A lot of people are excited to see you, not just me. Brett tried to think of how many people there could possibly be. He didn't know that many people. He also didn't want to play host to so many when all he really wanted to see was Savannah. He had other things on his mind to preoccupy him. The truth was that he worried about Savannah. All the while he was helping convert so many people in Iraq, the one conversion story he remained most worried about was hers. She had already come so far from when Brett had first met her. After his little chat with Dad, Brett put his head back and closed his eyes, not wanting to sleep, but wanting to relish in the memory of that first time he met Savannah Michelson. His memory took him back to the soft, gentle flow of the Laramie River. The warm spring breeze was light on his neck as Brett waited for the fish to take his bait. Tall silver maples cast shadows upon the river's banks and kept Brett out of the harm of the sun. It was late in the afternoon, getting close to 6 o'clock, and it seemed that Brett was the only one around the river. I've always found it interesting, learning about people's meeting stories. Savannah and Brett's story is wonderful and very telling of them. The way my parents had met was an interesting story as well. When my parents were younger, they had lived on the same street. Dad's younger brother Travis was Mom's friend growing up. Being that they were close in age, they had gone out on a few dates. For a while, the family thought Mom and Travis would end up together. Mom moved away when she was 10, but Uncle Travis still dated her from time to time. Both families kept only a little bit of contact. When Uncle Travis was 17, just before his high school senior year, he developed a strange lung virus that attacked him very quickly and aggressively. Even with everything the doctors could do, the virus took over his lungs. Travis died the summer before he was going to be a senior. Later, when Dad was 27, he was going to college and there was a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Institute dance that he was trying to find a date to. Grandma had told him that she still had Mom's parents' phone number and that he should call. So Dad called, feeling that it may be weird but worth a shot. Mom agreed and out they went. After the first date, Mom didn't think anything would come of it, but Dad persisted. In no time at all, he proposed. It was St. Patrick's Day of 2009. In August of 2009, they were married. And by July 2010, they had their first kids, twin boys, my older brothers Jeremy and Joseph. Grandma and Grandpa Larson had a great story as well. Grandpa was a service technician for Pepperidge Farms in Smithfield, Utah. Grandma worked there on the icing line. One night, the German chocolate icing machine malfunctioned and icing sprayed all over Grandma. When Grandpa showed up to fix the machine, he saw Grandma covered in the icing. His favorite icing, by the way, and he loved her from that moment on. This story is about Brett and Savannah, though, so I want to get back to them. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Brett was flying home from his mission when he started remembering his first meeting with Savannah, the day he had been fishing on the Laramie River. Just when Brett felt the tug on his pole, he heard that cry for help that he'd remembered for the rest of his life. Dropping his pole, Brett ran north through the tall maple trees and upstream to where he heard the scream. There on the west bank he saw a young girl, around 12, his same age. She had blondish orange hair and little freckles scattered on her bright red cheeks. She had slipped and fallen into the stream. The current wasn't extremely swift, but it seemed she was stuck under a limb that had her pinned down by her right leg, causing her head to dip below the water every few moments. Quickly, Brett jumped into the river and swam to the young girl's aid. Swimming under the water, Brett unpinned the girl's leg. Then, just like a scout who has his life-saving merit badge would do, he wrapped his arms around her and led her to the shore. "Are you all right?" Brett asked. All he got in response was the soft tears of shock. Trying to soothe her, Brett explained that she was all right and that he wouldn't let anything to happen to her. It was several moments before she could calm herself enough to respond. "I'm so embarrassed," she finally said. "There's nothing to be embarrassed about. You'll be fine now." Savannah looked up at Brett's brown puppy dog eyes and dark black hair. He made her feel so safe, and there was a strange comfort she felt with him even though she had only just met him. They didn't talk very much. Brett simply led her back to her parents' campsite. From there, they parted ways. Little did Brett know then that Savannah would become so important in his life. Brett had gotten so lost in his memory of that day that he didn't realize the flight attendant was asking him if he wanted a drink. He also noticed that Dad had gotten up, possibly to go to the restroom, and they wanted Dad's drink order as well. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll have cranberry juice with Sprite. My dad'll have the same." It wasn't only the memory that was preoccupying him, it was the drastic change in pace he was experiencing. Normally, at this time of day, Brett would be out knocking doors or teaching, anything to further the work of the Lord along. Now here he was, just sitting on an airplane. He felt like he was being too lazy. After taking a sip of his drink, Brett decided that he wanted to write down his testimony. It was now the end of his mission, and he felt it would be a good time to write it down. Grabbing his missionary journal out of his bag, Brett began to write. My testimony. It is now April 3rd, 2030, and I'm flying home from serving a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints mission in Iraq. So much of the church has changed in the last few years. The work is moving forward more and more all the time. On the other hand, worldliness is getting worse and worse. The first part of my testimony is my faith in the gospel. Especially at this time, I know that the gospel is the only saving message on the earth today. Without the saving principles taught by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, none would be saved. I also know that our church is guided and directed by a prophet. The fact that he is doing so much at his age is a testament to the responsibilities he still has here on earth. I also know that family is the most essential aspect to the gospel. I have seen the differences in people's lives when they are raised in a good and stable family and when they are not. It is as different as night as day. I also know that the Book of Mormon is the most important book on the face of the earth today. Without its teachings, we would be a lost people. I also know that eternal marriage is the only marriage ordained of God and should be a goal of every worthy Latter-day Saint. I know that the plan of salvation is essential in missionary work. The simple lesson of the plan is so valuable to those who do not have it, and I know it is the glad news of the message of Jesus Christ. I also know that through the Spirit all things are possible. I've seen enough miracles already in my life to know that is true. In closing, I know that if I dedicate my life and service to the Lord, I will be exalted in the last day. I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. What are you doing, son? I was just writing my testimony down. Nice to see that journal's coming in handy for you. Looking down at his dark brown leather journal, Brett remembered when he received it. Just 2 days before he was to enter the MTC, there was a knock at our door. Brett had been busy trying to fit all the essentials into his luggage. When he answered the door, he was met by a tearful-looking Savannah. She was wearing a white and green tank top. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like she had been in a hurry getting ready. I'm sorry, Savannah spoke softly through tears. Sorry for what? Brett asked. I just couldn't go to your farewell. I just didn't want this goodbye to be real. Savannah had been struggling with the concept of Brett needing to give up so much time for his church. She was still fairly new to the things of the gospel. It's okay, I understand. I didn't want you to leave without knowing I do care about you, though. Here, I wish you luck. With that, Savannah placed the leather-bound journal in Brett's hands. His name was embossed in gold on the front, but the most precious part was in the very front of the book. It was the small, simple testimony that Savannah had so far about the church. It helped Brett quite a lot on his mission. The main part that stood out to Brett was that Savannah used the word safe a lot. Her testimony was about how safe she felt when learning about Christ, and how safe she felt knowing she would be surrounded by good people. It was a moment that Brett would never forget. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing in just a few moments. Please make sure that your seats and tray tables are in their upright position. And again, thank you for flying with Delta. Brett was almost home, and the one hug he was most looking forward to was Savannah's. He could hardly wait to see her again and find out where her conversion was at. The drive home started to bring back a lot of memories for Brett. Not much had changed around Laramie, though. It was still the same old Wyoming town it had always been. It seemed that the old adage of the West always being the West was true. The sky was a brilliant blue with a few white fluffy clouds dotting the sky. It was almost 4:30 by the time they got home. Some friends and family would be coming over at 6 to welcome the returned missionary home, and for Brett, he hoped that Savannah would be among them. Walking into the house, the first person Brett was greeted by was our mother, Melanie. "It's so good to have you back home, Brett," Mom cried into Brett's shoulder. "Thanks, Mom. It's good to see you, too." Not too long after her hug, more hugs came from me, Tom, his younger brother, and Nancy, his younger sister. Then Jeremy and Joseph were next. They had driven home from Utah to welcome their youngest brother home. We weren't as affectionate as Mom, but it was still great to see him. Together, me and Nancy had made a big banner that hung on the outside windows that said, "Welcome home, Elder Larson." For Brett, it was a wonderful feeling to be welcomed back home. "Well, I know you probably want to go unpack and get comfortable before your party tonight. First, you do have to go get released by the stake president. He's waiting for you in his office." "Thanks, Mom." Going with Dad down to be released was an interesting experience for Brett. It was like his head just wasn't there. He couldn't believe it was happening. When he first left on the mission, he thought 2 years seemed so long, and now that he was being released, he felt like it was happening too fast. When they got back home, Brett had a few minutes to get changed before people came over. He was also excited to watch General Conference all weekend long. He had missed that spiritual feeling of watching it at home with his family. He also really wanted to see Savannah, but more importantly, he wanted to pick up with her right where they had left off. Chapter 3. Brett loved seeing all his old friends and family at his homecoming, but it was strange at the same time as well. He just kept noticing how much his 2 years' absence changed people. He wasn't sure if it was him or his friends, but everyone seemed different, or at least he saw them differently. There was his Deacon's Quorum advisor, Brother Jensen. He had another baby boy while Brett was gone. Then there was his bishop, Bishop Fox. Well, maybe he seemed the same good old bishop. One change he did like seeing was in Savannah. Brett wasn't sure at first if Savannah would come, but then around 6:45, after most everyone had showed up and gotten food, she snuck through the back door of our home. Brett had been busy engaged in a conversation with Uncle Ken, or at least he was feigning interest, when Savannah lightly tapped him on the shoulder. Brett hadn't noticed the touch at first, but then he heard her angelic soft voice break through the noise of the party. "It's good to see you again, Brett." "Savannah," Brett exclaimed as he turned around. Immediately, Brett excused himself from Uncle Ken to join her. It wasn't until they were outside alone under the front maple tree that Brett held Savannah in his arms with an embrace that spoke of how much he had missed her over the last 2 years. She had grown a bit while he was gone. Her once shoulder-length hair was now in the middle of her back in great waves. She stood a bit taller than he remembered, but the main change he had noticed was in her smile. Looking at her smile, he almost thought he saw the glow of the Spirit, but he wasn't sure. Still, seeing her did wonders for his soul. "For a while there, I almost thought you weren't going to come tonight," Brett said after releasing Savannah from their hug. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you? I mean, I did help your mom plan the food and get out the invitations. It's just I didn't see you, and I was worried." "Worried about what?" Savannah asked with her knowing smile. She knew what Brett was thinking, but she wanted him to say it. I was worried that after me being gone for so long that you wouldn't be as interested in me anymore, like you'd forget about me. I wrote you pretty much every week, didn't I? Yes, things between us have changed, but I think for the better. Haven't you ever heard of absence makes the heart grow fonder? Seeing that smile in her again, Brett couldn't help but hug her again. She hadn't been able to hug him. He hadn't been able to hug her for 2 years, and the feeling was both great and new all over again. Thank you for coming. I've really missed you. Of course. So how does it feel being home so far? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but it's okay. So what are your big plans now? Looking into Savannah's eyes, Brett saw a hint of that old fear he had seen in her eyes when he saved her from the river. From the letters he had been receiving from Savannah, he knew she was planning on going to Wyoming State, but Brett had yet to say what his plans were. For Brett, he was so focused on the great task of the mission ahead of him that his mind was set solely on preparing for that. He had expressed this to Savannah, and now that the mission was over, she wanted to know what he should do. What he would do. I'm actually not sure yet. Maybe I could look into going to Wyoming State. I don't know. Didn't you apply to any schools yet? Yeah, I applied for a few when I was a senior. I think Wyoming State was one. And you haven't received any replies in the mail yet? Suddenly, Brett had the impression that he needed to invite Savannah to watch General Conference with him that weekend. He didn't know why, but he also knew he shouldn't ignore that spiritual prompting. You just reminded me of something, Savannah. I wanted to ask you something. Okay, Savannah asked anxiously. I was wondering if you would want to watch General Conference with us this weekend. Maybe just 1 or 2 sessions, if you can? Savannah knew what her parents would say, and it wasn't like she hadn't snuck out and watched a session with the Larsons before. Still, her parents were becoming increasingly suspect about what she was doing. She could see that Brett really wanted her to come, but she would need to be careful. I'll see what I can do. I can't promise anything. So the party ended. Brett got to see and hug Savannah, and there were high hopes that she would come and watch General Conference with us. That weekend, everyone was excited for General Conference. It may have been that Brett was home or something, but there was certainly something in the air. Months before, on a Wednesday evening, the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles met together to talk about how they would deliver the news to the world about the building of the Jackson County temples. Along with discussing the timing of the announcement, the leadership of the church also wanted to go over the document that the First Presidency had written about the project. They wanted the spirit of the letter to be correct. The feeling in the upper corner of the office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints headquarters was mostly of excitement and anticipation. It was 2030, 200 years since the church was organized, and it was time to build the Jackson County temples. Every apostle in the room felt the weight and the importance of the announcement that President Thatcher would make in just a few months. Listening to him read it was a very spiritual experience. Well, brethren, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Do you have any feelings or impressions about what needs to be said? President, I think putting it in that matter-of-fact way will help people to just receive the news as the natural next step to what we've been doing. I think your tone of excitement and energy is exactly what was needed. Thank you. Anyone else? As President Thatcher listened to the apostles, they all praised him for the way he delivered the message, and the way the First Presidency drafted it. No one thought it needed any further revision. They believed it was written exactly the way it needed to be. After getting the document squared away, President Thatcher displayed a mock-up of what the temple project would look like once completed. No one but President Thatcher and the architect working on it had seen it yet. Just looking at the 24 temples and the amazing design and structure, not only on the temples but on the grounds around them as well, brought the spirit even stronger into the room. This would be the most important temple project the church would ever build. Along with his announcement, President Thatcher would display the mock-up picture of the temples for the saints to see. Another thing the church would be doing at the same time is putting added security measures in Jackson County. President Thatcher knew that once the announcement was made, that forces would come to try and impede the work. Putting added security measures there would need to be completed as soon as possible. The morning sessions went great, although it seemed that Brett was distracted since Savannah hadn't shown up. As the day went on, it seemed he was looking towards the door every few minutes, just hoping, waiting for her to come walking through. Even when he went to the stake center to watch the priesthood session, he still looked toward the door, even though he knew she wouldn't come through the doors. As the conference went on, there were more and more talks about the importance of temple work. The second coming, being prepared for anything, things of that nature, and that only added to the electric feeling of that April conference of 2030. Everyone was sure there would be some big announcement in the Sunday morning session. The next morning, as per our usual, we had Mom's special breakfast sandwiches while we listened to the music and the spoken word. And then in she came. Savannah had made up some story, left her parents, and came to watch the Sunday morning session with us. "I'm sorry, Brett. I would have come yesterday, but my parents were upset that I came over the other day for your homecoming." "Oh, I'm sorry. It's great to see you, though. Thank you for coming." Then that legendary session began. All the excitement and electricity people were feeling was justified when they heard President Thatcher read that letter, announcing the Jackson County temples. I remember looking around at my family and looking at Brett and Savannah. Brett had that slight smile and excited look he gets sometimes. Savannah looked a bit worried, and I wasn't sure why. For days after, it was all anyone was talking about, and for many people, they were waiting and wondering when construction would begin.